Welcome to Tabletop Tommies, Episode 8. I'm Jonny.
And I'm Phil.
And today we're going to be talking about Armies of Germany. Last episode we went through the British lists and we talked very much about the units that we thought were fun, or should be seen more often. The focus there was because the Brits are already quite a competitive force, so we thought it would be more interesting to focus on the interesting units. The German army, however, isn't really seen as a competitive force within bolt action, so we thought this episode would focus more on the competitive side. So what I've done is I've made what I think to be the most competitive of German lists, and I think, Phil, I will talk you through it and you can criticise it and tell me why it's terrible. And then at the end we will go through some of the units, much like we did in the British one, that we think are just fun units that we'd like to see more often. Before we do go through the list, would you like to talk us through the national characteristics for Germany, Phil?
Absolutely, Jonny. So there are 4 army special rules for Germany. So the first one is Blitzkrieg. What this allows you to do is for German officers using the U-Men Snap to Action special rule, they can take 1 additional order dice from the bag and assign it as normal. So what this means, for example, is that a German second lieutenant or lieutenant takes 2 dice instead of 1. A German first lieutenant takes 3 dice, and a captain takes 4, and a German major takes 5.
Fantastic.
So the second one is initiative training. And what this allows you to do is if an infantry squad's NCO is killed, you roll a d6. On a score of 1, the NCO is removed as normal. However, on a roll of 2 or higher, one of the other troopers takes over the squad and leads it just as effectively as before. And to represent this, you leave the NCO in place and remove any other model instead. It's assumed then that the new squad leader swaps his weapons with the ones carried by the NCO if they are different.
Yeah, and that's a really important point that's often missed. I've seen people play this where they remove the NCO, roll a 2 up, and then they say, so my Panzerfaust is now the NCO. No, unfortunately, what that means is you've lost your Panzerfaust.
Absolutely. It also has a knock-on effect for things like loaders, doesn't it, Jonny, or assistants for things like flamethrowers and LMGs?
Yeah, it essentially means you got the last man to die will usually be the NCO model.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, if you've got the NCO and the flamethrower left, even though you might want to keep the flamethrower because he's only got 1 pin, you've still got to roll that 2 up. And there's a 5 to 6 chance that you're going to lose your flamethrower.
Okay. The third one is Hitler's Buzzsaw. And what Hitler's Buzzsaw allows you to do is for German light and medium machine guns, they fire 1 extra shot. This applies to all light and medium machine guns, both those carried by infantry units and vehicle-mounted ones.
This is my favourite of the 3 so far because it's universally useful. Every machine gun gets it. It's not a situational one. It just makes those weapons that could be not as valuable that little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the Tiger Fear one. Now, the book version is all units that have line of sight to the Tiger suffer from Tiger Fear. That was, of course, FAQ'd recently. It was in the September 22 FAQ, and it was changed to, instead of just line of sight, all enemy units that are within 18 inches of and have line of sight to 1 or more vehicles with Tiger Fear suffer from Tiger Fear. Now, you measure the 18-inch range after you've declared what order you've given the unit. So if your bazooka team can see the Tiger, you have to gauge, is he within the 18? Do I want to do a fire order or an advance before you measure that 18 inches? So they've very nicely clarified that compared to Vengeance. When it first was changed, they hadn't done that. And that caused a bit of a problem because then you allow them pre-measure.
Yeah, and it's worth just clarifying that what Tiger Fear does is for a unit that's suffering from Tiger Fear, they count as having 1 extra pin marker on them when taking any order test, except if ordered to fire against a vehicle which has Tiger Fear.
Yeah.
Or causing Tiger Fear. Yeah.
And it's really important that I saw this come up recently on, I think, on the Facebook groups, where the question was, if you have 3 vehicles with Tiger Fear in front of you, are you still Tiger Feared if you fire at 1 of them? And it's really important that, except if ordered to fire against a vehicle, Tiger Fear. So you only have to shoot against 1 of them and you no longer have Tiger Fear.
Yeah.
There is a little bit, before we move on, there is one more contentious issue with Tiger Fear I found, which is that for some reason in the FAQ somebody asked Does a unit being transported have line of sight to the vehicle causing Tiger Fear if the vehicle itself has it? Now, in bolt action, units and vehicles just aren't on the table. They never really interact with the game in any way. The only times they do is the officer gives his morale boost to transports that he's in and other squads that are in the transport with him. I can't think of another example where a unit in a vehicle can interact with units on the table.
No, we did have a discussion, didn't we, about vengeance in an earlier episode.
Yeah.
For example, a unit inside a transport that hasn't yet been deployed onto the table. And again, by the wording of vengeance, it says any unit within 12 inches of the unit that's testing.
Yeah. So the way they answered this, just to summarise, is they said if the transport has line of sight to the Tiger Fear causing vehicle, so have any passengers. Now, with that vengeance one, we very much relied on this FAQ answer to justify why you can do vengeance-sided transport. To be honest, if this answer wasn't here, I'd say, well, you're not on the table, you're not within 12 for vengeance. And I would say I would have answered this one myself to say, no, you can't. And the other reason I would do that is because one of the big problems with Tiger Fear is rules that cause a negative to your opponent rather than a positive to you are generally not good rules, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem with Tiger Fear. Now, the benefit of Tiger Fear is that there is a get out of jail clause.
Mm-hmm.
If you do a fire order, you can just ignore it. If I'm on a transport, I can't do a fire order.
Yes, true.
And so you've taken away my only get out of jail clause. And so, like, what do you want me to do? Like, I can't stay in the transport because then I get Tiger Fear. I can't get out of the transport without having Tiger Fear. What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that was a particularly bad FAQ answer there. And I don't think it's really based in the rules. I think it's basically based on the opinion of the person who answered it, sort of like the way they thought the game should be played, rather than looking for an example in the rule book.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I think that's enough moaning about FAQs for one episode. Shall we move on to what I consider to be my most competitive German list to date?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what you've come up with, Jonny.
Fantastic. So, back to FAQ straight away, but this time on a positive note. They added for the Panzer 3Ds a second machine gun in the coax. Now, you were just telling us about how good German machine guns are.
Yeah.
And so what that means is now the Panzer 3Ds have 2 machine guns in the turret and 1 in the hull for 18 shots total. So it's very much now the German Stuart. Slight difference because it's because the 2 are on the coax. It's beneficial if you've got infantry behind you because obviously you can turn that turret 360. But the negative is if you shoot the anti-tank gun, because again it's got the same light anti-tank gun, if you shoot that you do lose 12 shots compared to in the Stuart. You're only losing 5 by doing that.
Yeah.
And so it is swings and roundabouts. I mean, the other benefit of it is it's the same price, 140 points, but it doesn't have the vulnerable rule with the +1 to penetrate on the sides and rear. So I actually think it's better than the Stuart. And so for that reason, I went dual platoon and included 2. Before I go any further, actually, to clarify, I've written this list to 1,000 points dual platoon.
Okay.
I thought that was a fairly standard layout you'd see at competitive events. Do you think that was about right, Phil, or is there a more common restriction set?
No, I think, 1,000 points, dual platoon, you often see, dual platoon, or if they're allowing theatre selectors, it may only be a single theatre selector. So, that's a pretty good start to work from.
Brilliant. So, I took 2 of them. So, it's a dual platoon list. I've got 2 Panzer 3Ds. I then took, as outriders, 2 motorcycles with MGs, Recce. 40 points, brilliant. 2 inexperienced Nebelwerfers. 2 inexperienced heavy mortars. 2 regular 5-man Waffen SS squads, just with rifles. 2 regular Pioneers. So they're the Waffen SS Pioneers as well.
Yep.
They've got flamethrowers, and I've given the NCO an SMG. I've got a truck for them. So what you might have noticed before I got to that point, everything I'd bought in pairs, so much like in our list building episode, I tried to keep the 2 platoons as close as possible. But because I only had 2 Pioneers, I have only bought the 1 truck with the MMG, regular. I've got 2 of the Waffen SS officers. Now, these guys are found in the US Sectors D-Day book, I believe. Is that right, Phil?
That's right, yep.
Yeah, and so these are absolute quality units, and this is why I included the late war Waffen SS squads, because you can only include the Waffen officer if you have late war Waffen
Yeah.
in your list. And so each platoon had to have one squad. Now, the benefit of him is he's 5 points less.
Yeah.
Bargain. You can take him inexperienced if you'd like. The negative is that he doesn't get the German officer special rule that we talked about at the beginning, where you get one extra snap to. But actually, I think for the saving of 5 points and the opportunity to run him inexperienced, he is worth it. What do you think, Phil? Yeah?
Yeah, so he doesn't get the Blitzkrieg special rule. Although, interestingly, Jonny, in your list, you have taken both your Waffers as regular rather than inexperienced.
So one of those squads is a 2-man.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to go in the truck with the Pioneers. And so he's going in there. So if I reserve or outflank, then it gives the X +1 to cancel the -1 for coming on from reserve.
Yeah.
Equally, when he gets out, he's going to have the 2 assault rifles as modelled. And so I wanted him to be hitting on 2s at point blank. And so that's why that one is regular. In the other squad, I actually went with a 3-man regular.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I did that is because he's not going to be in the truck. And what you might have noticed is I've only got 4 infantry squads. And so the idea was, much like when we're talking about in earlier episodes, the plan is to use him as a tiny little infantry squad. He's a bit like a stub-nosed machine gun team because it's 6 shots with the assault rifle but only to 18 inches, but he gets to move without the movement penalty, so I think he'll actually be a nice little unit for that. And then finally, one of my favourite units in the entire game, in the Battle of France book, you can take, instead of a medium machine gun team, in the same slot you can take a light machine gun team for 15 points less, and not only do you save those 15 points, you also lose the fixed rule. And actually, what I've done, because I didn't have 35 points left, but I did have enough to take one inexperienced at 20 points.
Okay.
And that's given me 16 dice, which means half my units are 8. And so if I am going to do a mission with maybe it's a prep, or maybe it's one where I want to try and counter their tank, I can actually keep off the board the truck, the 2 engineers, and the officer. That's 4 units. The 2 panzers and the 2 bikes. And so that protects all those units against prep, but equally it allows me to do a counter attack, maybe come on from the outflank, depending on what the mission is. So, what do you think, Phil? Am I going to be winning any games with this one?
I think it's a list that will win games. Is it as competitive as it could be? Probably not. So in terms of the positives, you've basically built it for redundancy. You've got two of the Panzer threes, 2 of the motorcycles, 2 of the Nebelwerfers, 2 of the heavy mortars, 2 pioneers, and then the rest is kind of add for flavour. So in that sense, yeah, there's definitely built for redundancy. Yeah, and you've thrown in some units that we don't always see. So you mentioned just now about the LMG team, and it's worth being aware of that. That you can take the LMG in place of the MMG. If you use the Battle of France version, it's a lot cheaper. There are other versions available in the US D-Day sectors book. There's a version that allows you to take it in any theatre selector, so you can swap an LMG team for one of your MMG teams in a theatre selector. Kind of praying for 6s, 2 Nebelwerfers, 2 heavy mortars, inexperienced. So all 4 of them are going to need to have obviously line of sight. I like the motorcycle with the machine gun sidecar. It's putting out 6 shots. It's got recce, that kind of thing. So there's a couple of things that really stand out. There's probably about 3 things actually. One is you've only got 4 squads. So you've got, ignoring your Wofficer, you've got a 5-man regular Waffen SS squad, 5-man regular Waffen SS Pioneer squad in the first platoon, and you're doing the same in the second platoon. So you've actually only got 20 infantry models across the 4 squads, and they're all regular. So if you're looking at, to be honest, kill points, but particularly anything involving objectives, key positions, timely objectives, that kind of thing, how well are those squads going to stay on the board when the pressure starts coming on? The other thing is missing as well for me is Panzerfaust. So you've taken late war squads where you've got the option of including Panzerfaust, but you haven't included them. And if you dropped your Waffers down to inexperienced, that would free up some points where you could add some Panzerfaust to the squads. Just to go back to an earlier point, you said that you don't like the Blitzkrieg, or you don't think the Blitzkrieg rule is as good as other German rules. I think for this particular build, where you've got 2 Nebelwerfers and 2 heavy mortars, If you had normal officers that do have the Blitzkrieg special rule rather than the Waffen SS officers, you can use that to your advantage. You stick a second lieutenant in between both your Nebelwerfers or a Nebelwerfer and a heavy mortar. You snap two, and you're firing two Nebelwerfers or a Nebelwerfer and heavy mortar when you get the opportunity early on in the turn. And the reason for doing that, yes, you're looking for sixes unless you started to range in with your heavy mortars. But what you're trying to do is to force your opponent to go down, and therefore take dice out the bag, which you can exploit later with your double panzers, double motorcycles, engineers, and so on.
Before we go any further, that is one of the things I was considering, was to run, because I think I probably, instead of running a 3-man, obviously he's 5 points cheaper, I could run a 2-man regular officer and do exactly that. The big benefit of doing that as well is if you put the Nebels within 12 of each other, with him in the middle, he's within 6 of those two, and they're within 12 of each other to recruit,
yes,
which is really nice. Before we pile on more points as well, I think probably swing back to some of the early ones. So the praying for sixes thing is a really interesting one, because so altogether the 2 heavy mortars, the 2 Nebels, you sort of your 200 points-ish.
Yeah.
Now, each turn, as long as you get the dice off to actually fire them, you should be getting sort of 6 to 8 opportunities to roll 6, because let's say each Nebel gets 3 targets, each heavy mortar gets 1 target.
Yep.
Now, if I'm rolling 6 to 8 dice a turn, there's a very good chance I'm going to get at least 1. If I can do that 2 or 3 turns, I only have to take out 2 squads and they've made their money back. But you are right, they aren't there. So they are there just to get those sort of cheap kills, but they're also there just to keep you spread out, allowing me to sort of pick you off one at a time.
Yeah.
So that was that one. On the infantry side, now, one of the big benefits of running a list like this, where you got lots of small units, is actually those Nebels and heavy mortars are objective scoring. And so they're quite useful for that. They're going to be so far back compared to your other units that actually, if you play sort of a classic key positions where you have 1 in your zone, 1 in their zone, 1 in the middle, you can gamble on the Nebels and the heavy mortar. And especially if you do that thing with your officers, you say, that's 5 units that can hold that objective that your opponent has to clear. And so you've actually got a little bit more holding power than you think. But you are right, this isn't an army for sort of fighting a war of attrition.
Yeah.
This is an army where you have to swing the game in your favour. And if you don't start putting units down, taking order dice early, you're absolutely right. They're going to whittle down your 20 regular infantrymen, and you're going to end up with nothing with any bite left in the game, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would do, but I can't see how to do it with the points, is rather than having a single truck, I try and get 2 heavy field cars so I can put a pioneer squad in each heavy field car. I know that's going to muck up how you split your officer amongst your transport. And I know it also goes against your view, which is that transport should carry an MMG in order to put a pin out, so they're not just an infantry carrying unit that does nothing once they've deposited their troops.
Absolutely. And you're right. That's how, and this is one of the problems I have when I play German lists, because I do tend to run a lot of transports. If I ever write a German list with transports, I find myself longing for a Dodge carrier. And then at that point, I start to think, should I just build this list as a US list? Because I've got most of the same toys, really. And so that's one of the things that often, unless it's theatre selectors, it's one of the things that sort of pushes me back to US every time I try to splash out into the Germans. Now, the slightly cheaper officers are something the US don't have access to, which is quite nice. And the LMG team, the 20 points dice for 5 shots. It's the same as I run the US machine gun team for 35 points, and it's the same, but it has fixed.
Yeah.
So that is an absolute win. I think 16 dice as well, you're in that sweet spot, because I think 10 dice you need to know how to play, because you're always going to be at a dice disadvantage.
Yeah.
20 dice, your units are so squishy. Again, you need to have really practiced with that list. And one of the things I was aiming for here with this list is I actually think this list, it might not be the best bolt action list for competitive tournaments, but I think it's sufficiently competitive that actually it has a chance of winning every game.
Yeah.
And so if it doesn't, it's not just, the list is terrible. I think if it doesn't win, there is a reason why it hasn't won. Because I think you've got enough toys there that you should be able to win most games.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, in no way is it a bad list. I just think, yeah, if it doesn't come off, if your never worthers don't hit, or you're playing against, an enemy, an opponent that's got a couple of snipers, they start taking out some of your heavy mortars, early doors, that kind of thing. You've got a bunch of Japanese or Gurkhas who are going to, assault your squads off objectives, etc. I think that is the risk of it. It's interesting what you said about the Americans, because if you actually dig into this list, substitute your Panzer for a Stuart with Recce. Okay, it's not quite the same points, but we can do that. You get your multi launchers in terms of your level worthers. You get your heavy mortars in the German, in a American list. You can take your Dodges, your 8-man transports with an MMG. So, yeah, I think one of the problems I find when I try and write a decent German list is I just go, actually, I can do this better with another nation.
That's exactly right. So when we knew we were going to do Germany this episode, I decided I'd sit down, try and write the most competitive list I could. And that was exactly what I faced, because I thought, well, they're very good at veterans and all the toys.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a veteran list, and then I thought, well, this isn't as good as Gurkhas.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went very flamethrower heavy. And again, I thought, well, this isn't as good as my American flamethrower list. And so I think you're right. No matter what build you build, there's probably someone who does it better. The only one I think they do better, but the problem is I don't think it's a super competitive build, is the high explosive build. I think nobody does high explosive better than Germany. The problem is, if you build that list, so if I replace those Panzer 3Ds with Panzer Werfer instead, then I am playing that Hunt in the Six game. And basically I'm playing the casino game, aren't I? And that is something that I don't think anyone can do as well as the Germans, to throw out sort of 6 to 8 3-inch pie plates a turn. But it's a game of roll sixes. And so that's why I don't think it is a super competitive build. I think when it hits, it's a big hit. But equally, there's times you'll lose the game, and it's just because the sixes never showed.
Absolutely, yeah. As you're saying that, I'm thinking that if this segment had a song, it would be Carly Simon's Nobody Does It Better.
If we start doing an interval like the Snafu guys.
Absolutely.
The only problem is I think that's
probably copyrighted.
Too modern a song. Yeah, exactly. So, as I said, the idea of that list was, I think that is, if you wanted to play competitive Germans, I think you could rock up with that list and you'd have a good chance of winning every single game. And I think a good player with that list would finish top 3, maybe definitely top 5 at something like the Welsh Nationals. Equally, if you want to come sort of top 3, I think you will have had to practice. But I think even without practice, you're going to secure yourself a nice mid-table result with this.
I'm just looking at your total points. It's also 996. You can get a cheeky mule team in for the last 4 points.
So I considered it. There's 2 things I considered. And then I thought back to earlier episodes of the podcast. So the 2 things I considered was, do I take a mule team? If I did, I'd have to deploy him, because I very much, like we were talking about during the building the Force episode, I deliberately built it so I could put the tanks, the bikes, and the engineers in a truck in reserve.
Yep.
Which means that if I take that 17th dice, yes, I have 1 more dice, but he's going on the table, and I could lose him in prep, and then I'm 1 victory point behind in no man's land. So for that reason, I thought it's not worth it. The extra dice isn't worth that cost. I did think about putting another SMG in onto the Pioneers. It would mean my platoons aren't the same, even less the same. I think if I was going super competitive, I probably would find some way to spend those 4 points. But as very much a test list, I thought I'll leave it short. I was thinking if at some point we start doing battle reports, it would be really interesting to face this list against its British equivalent with the 2 Stuarts and the Gurkhas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that would be a really good test as just to how competitive this list is. Because it does have a little bit of an edge over the Brits, where generic, they don't get the multi-launchers.
Yeah. Subject to the TO's ruling for the event, but yeah, on the whole.
Indeed. So that was my attempt at a strong, competitive German list that sort of anyone could pick up and play. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, okay, that's sort of your general list, competitive list. What would I do? And so I've built another list, which I think is potentially equally strong, but not without practice.
Okay.
So the other list I've got is very much, it's exactly the same list mostly, but what I did was I made the Waffen rifle squads inexperienced.
Yeah.
I ditched the bikes, so I've saved myself some points there, And then I saved even more points by changing the Panzer IIIs to Flammpanzerwagen. And all those points I've used to buy 2 of my favourite armour cars, the 250/9s, with a light autocannon, coax MMG, not open-topped, got recce. And so this list, I think, needs a lot of practice because you haven't got the long-range anti-tank that the Panzer IIIs were giving you.
Yeah.
But you've just doubled your number of flamethrowers, which is tasty. And you've got those 250/9s for dealing with the light armour like the Stuarts. And something like outflanking this, where you've got the 2 armoured cars, the 2 panzer wagons, and the truck with engineers coming on from the flank. I mean, even if you split them, it's going to be tricky to deal with the 4 armour 7s and the truck coming on all sort of together. And so the problem is, obviously, it would be very easy to misplay that outflank and end up with your flamethrowers 24 inches from the nearest enemy. And so this is the list that I would play because it's fun and competitive.
Yeah.
But I think it's the one that would require far more tuning and practice with.
Yeah, I'd agree. I just thought it was getting a bit hot in here. That's because you've just added in more flamethrowers, to be fair. So, as somebody who likes playing vets, to then see that you've downgraded your 5-man SS squads to inexperienced, I'm actually coming out in a cold sweat despite the flame heat.
When we were talking about the last list, and you were already saying, I don't think you have enough hardy infantrymen, it was making me laugh silently there, knowing what was coming next.
Yeah. So I think with this one, I can absolutely see that in the right hands with some practice, particularly with the outflank, you could absolutely decimate, an opponent's back line or even midline, depending on when you bring the units on the outflank. On the flip side, if you're playing against an experienced player who's basically sussed out what you're going to do, if they deploy centrally and also rush forward, if you've put a load of those Flammpanzers, trucks, Pioneers, maybe even the half-tracks, the 259s on the outflank, if they're seeing that, you've effectively got some LMGs, some heavy mortars and Nebelwerfers deployed. Well, if they've got either the range or the speed, they're going to rush up and try and take out those squishy units before you can bring the outflank on. And if they stay in the middle of the board, rather than having pushing to the edge, there's less of a danger of getting hit on the outflank. That said, because you've got 2 Nebelwerfers, if they do bunch up, you're potentially going to start reining in the fire. So thinking it through, it synergizes quite well.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. That is always the goal.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this is why it's one that for a more experienced German player, because the previous one, you can play it in a very traditional way where you're a little bit coy with your tank and you advance your engineers up behind cover and you're sort of a little bit tactical. With the Flammpanzer version of the list, it is one where you have to practice the list. You have to know exactly what strengths and weaknesses are, because every mission, you're probably going to play it slightly differently. Now, to someone who doesn't play the list, it might look like you're playing it the same, like, oh, he's done the outflank again. But actually, you've done the outflank differently, because in this mission, you deploy your force on the left and outflank on the right, so they're in opposites, like a pincer. And in this mission, you've done it where they're both coming on the same flank. And the reason for that will be because this mission rewards that. Until you're really experienced with an army list and you've lost a good few times with it, it's hard to know those little quirks. But yeah, so this is why, for me, the Flammpanzer list is the funner list. It's the one that's more my style, but it is the one that does require a little bit more fine-tuning.
Yeah, 2 thoughts. One is that you basically play this with Americans, but arguably better. But secondly, it'd be interesting how this does against, say, a Japanese list with their asbestos pants, because if they're not bothered about the amount of flamethrowers going on, plus they can banzai, they can start, ignoring the flames that are coming in. Okay, they're going to take damage because of the flamethrowers, but if they can also start banzaiing your open top Flammpanzer as well, there could be an interesting outcome in that sense. Yeah,
and that's what I found, because obviously we talked about the flamethrowers being so strong, but I did find at the Welsh Nationals that because of the FAQ ruling that's given the Japanese the asbestos trousers, and stubborn being so prevalent because the Paragurk has been so prevalent at competitive tournaments, it actually is quite arduous to play the barbecue list now, because you're not removing units. Whenever I play Japanese, you're having to kill them to a man, And so with a flamethrower, you're averaging about sort of 3 or 4 models. You're averaging about 3, because you get on average about 3.5 hits, and then you get a 1 in 6 times you don't do the wound. And so you average about 3 kills with a flamethrower. If someone's brought 12 spearmen, you're just having to sort of wear them down.
Yep.
And you're not getting those big swings like you get when you flame like when I flame the British Stuart and it sets on fire and the ammo blows up. That's a big swing, and you don't get that against these Japanese armies. And so it is quite arduous playing flamethrowers against competitive lists now. And it's one of the reasons that I'm thinking about moving away from the flamethrowers. But it's...
Hold the front page. Shock horror, you heard it here first.
I know. I'm so torn, because competitively, I don't think the flamethrowers are where it's at anymore. So the competitive side of me wants to basically start doing lists with 1 or 2 flamethrowers, and they're only really there to sort of deal with a nut that I can't crack otherwise. So maybe it's like veterans on an objective, and so they're getting like down hard cover. I'm hitting them on Super 6s with rifles. Or it's like to kill a tank that my medium anti-tank guns are just plinking off the front. And so competitively, I think I would be better going something like Finns, where you get all these other bolster rules. But I do love flamethrowers, and so I'm loathed to leave them at home. I'm really torn.
Personally, if you did leave them at home for a bit, I wouldn't mind at all, because I am getting a bit bored of getting toasty whenever we do play each other.
I mean, this is where I think we're going to have to swap as well at some point, and you try the flamethrowers out, and I'll try to play against, because the great irony as well is I actually don't see people running flamethrowers that often. And this is one of the things that tells me that they're not really the super competitive build that some people sort of claim them to be, because if they were, everyone would be building them. All the sort of the guys who are coming top 3 at the Nationals and at the WTC, they'd be building sort of 6 to 10 flamethrower lists, and they're really not. And so I actually think the flamethrower lists aren't on the same tier as the Gurkha Stuart lists.
Yeah, the FAQ has dampened down the flames somewhat, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I'm not as worried about the Japanese with these armies. The ones that does worry me is playing the Brits. The Gurkhas and the Stuarts are equal or better matched, perhaps. And then obviously you're also getting those 100 free points. And so with the free artillery observer. And so, yeah. Anyway, so
it is worth just jumping on that for a moment, because one of the common things you hear about Germans is they don't get that free unit. You know, the Brits get the observer, the Soviets get the inexperienced squad. You know, the French and other nations get the free howitzers. Some events will allow the Brits to have the Indian squad and the observer. You know, why not give them 200 more points? So that sort of thing. So yeah, the Germans and to be fair, and other nations do suffer because they don't get that additional unit or units.
Yeah, I think on that note, the French one, I think now the howitzer is like getting the free artillery observer. Their inexperienced squad that they get is equivalent to the cheapest of the 3 they bought. So they're having to invest to get that back, and you're now running 3 out of your 5 squads are inexperienced, and so you are sacrificing a bit for that. And then the other thing with the French is they don't get any of the benefits, and that's the problem with the Brits. It's not that they're getting lots of free stuff, it's that they also have brilliant national rules, whereas I think the US have the brilliant national rules but don't get the free stuff. And so that's one of the big reasons why actually I think we're seeing the Brits at the top tables rather than the Germans and some of the other nations. So that was the competitive German listing. I thought, just for a bit of balance, we should talk about some fun units. So what are some of the units that you look at when you're looking at Germany, Phil?
So the 2 that I like is, we mentioned this in the previous episode, it's the SDKFZ 7/1, 7/2, which is the quad autocannon on the back of a truck. And depending on which version you take, you can either have it as a soft skin 6+ or an armoured cab with a 7+. It is open top. It is squishy. It's a cool looking model, and it absolutely shreds, soft skin vehicles, armor 7 vehicles, and also infantry squads as well. It is pricey. So, you don't see it very often in a competitive list. I have seen it in 1250 point dual platoon events.
Yeah.
So you might take, the Dakar Panzer III and then take this as well. So yeah, it does appear every now and then, but I really like it. The other one that I'm interested in and I have used once is the Brandenburgers. And I know, Jonny, you've taken them before, dressed as nuns on the run.
Different ones, though, I think, to you.
Okay.
Because are we talking the same Brandenburgers here? Which ones are you liking?
The normal Brandenburgers.
Right, because they're in about 4 different books,
Okay.
I tell me what they do, and we'll try to work out from where they come.
So the Brandenburgers that are fanatic and also have access to all the SMGs and all the toys. They're really expensive and they muck around with people's outflanked and reserve roles and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the ones that turn all the road signs around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So they're the ones. Yeah. So those are the ones that you see at tournaments, I find, because people take them to try and mess around with people's outflanks.
Yeah.
I actually find they're not, because I run regular transports, I find them not that bothersome, really.
And also because you often play US, it doesn't have as much of an impact anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I find against the US, the Brandenburgers, their special ability where essentially what you do, I believe, is you get an additional -1 to come on from outflank, and then you also, when you come on, you have to take a second order test.
That's right, yeah.
And if you fail that second order test, you're limited to coming on within 12 inches of your board edge.
Yes.
So say I outflanked left, instead of coming on up to 24 on turn 3, I can only come on up to 12.
Mm-hmm.
When I've faced them, I've often been running my US with my Dodgers, and it's not a huge problem to have that -1 because it just means my US are the same as everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm testing it at 8. And then also that second rule, I'm running sort of 5 or 6 Dodgers coming on from the outflank, and so actually it'll be 5 because usually I'm running 20 dice. And so if one of them comes on 12 inches back, that's fine. It can move 24 inches. It'll just zoom up the flank.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, it won't get to do its thing this turn, but I've got 4 other ones. I think there's certainly times when the Brandenburgers will ruin someone's day.
Yeah.
But I've found them not that bothersome, generally. The ones that I was thinking of, the ones that I've run, are the Sea Lion ones, where you dress them up as nuns or whatever, and they've infiltrated, and usually in the Sea Lion book there's missions like where they've got to go sort of kidnap Churchill or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they're a lot of fun because they're in disguise. You're limited to sort of small arms. You've got pistols. I think they make you pay 4 points for an SMG.
Okay.
It's like, that's how ridiculous they are.
Right.
And so if you really want to put yourself at a disadvantage at an event, take the Sea Lion Brandenburgers, because you've got to end up with about 7 to 8 squads at 1,000 points of about 6 to 8 veterans with pistols or SMGs. And if there's a tank, you best just ignore it because you're not going to do anything to it.
Yeah, I have taken Brandenburgers a couple of times because I've mentioned before about enjoying the modelling side of things. I've got one unit of Brandenburgers that are US military police.
Yep, nice.
My Germans are Winter Germans, so obviously they work in terms of Battle of the Bulge. I've also got another Brandenburger squad that is Soviet partisans. So if I'm running, mid-war. A German list, Winter German list. Obviously, without the Panzerfaust on the Eastern Front, I've got Soviet partisans to represent the Brandenburgers.
Very nice. Jumping back to your anti-tank trucks. So the 7.2 with the heavy autocannon on the back is only 65 points. I think that's an absolute bargain. The 7.1, I think it is, with the quad, that one's 145 points. So you're putting quite a lot of points into that.
Yeah.
And so I think if I was going that route, I think I'd run the Whirlwind.
Yeah.
I mean, you've faced my Whirlwind.
I have, yeah.
What do you think of the Whirlwind?
I spent most of the game trying to pin it and actually just got shot to pieces, to be fair.
I think that's the only time I've run it, and it came off good, if I'm honest.
It did all right, yeah. Interestingly, it's just going back to the 7/2. So that's 65 points for a heavy autocannon on a soft skin. You only pay 60 points for the Bofors version in the Brits.
Oh, really?
Yeah, warlord bias towards the Brits, as we often hear.
Well, I imagine it was because the Armies of Germany is the only book that's got a version 2 update, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And so I imagine what it was when they released it, they were planning to do a bit of a reshuffle of points. and then obviously never got around to doing all the other books.
Hmm.
That would be my guess there. Either that, or it's a complete oversight.
Yeah.
Or they're just biased against the Germans.
I think we've mentioned this before with the Brits, that they've got, so many different permutations of weapon systems and armor values and so on. Germany takes it to the next level, doesn't it? In terms.
Oh, insane!
Yeah, the number of different combinations. I've just thought about it. The Stuka Zufus, I really like that. So the half track with the multi launcher on the back and the MMG forward facing MMG.
Yeah, I see your Stuka, and I raise you the Reynolds Huey, the stolen artillery tractor with rockets strapped to the back.
Yeah,
that is my favourite. That was the one that I was saying. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode. I bought a Renault from Mad Bob. I bought the Howling Cow model from Warlord, and I mashed them together because I really wanted one. And then about a month later, Warlord released the kit.
Okay.
And but actually what I found is the third version of that vehicle, the Panzerwerfer, is my favourite because both the Stukas...
Mm-hmm. No, carry on, sorry.
Yeah, both the Stuka Zufus and the Renault have forward-facing multi-launchers.
Right. Okay.
Whereas now the Renault is fully tracked, it only gets one turn, which means the half-tracked version gets 2 turns. So even though you're forward-facing, you've still got quite a bit of manoeuvrability there. The Panzerwerfer, though, it's got a 360 turret for the rockets, and so it gives you a nice bit of flexibility to park the Panzerwerfer sort of behind a house with its bum hanging out and shoot the rockets backwards. So you're getting the cover, but you're still being able to shoot the rockets.
And it's closed top, unlike the Stuka Zufus.
Yes, actually, that is another tick.
Yeah.
The Stuka Zufus is my favourite in terms of just the coolest of the three, I think. But I find the Renault and the Panzerwerfer are the two that are fighting for a place in my list.
Yep, okay.
Were there any other units you want to discuss?
I guess on a similar vein, it's the Flak Vierlin, which is the fixed artillery version of the quad light autocannon, which again absolutely shreds soft skins, AV7 transports and armored cars and so on, and also obviously infantry.
You're very much on a anti-aircraft binge at the moment, aren't you?
I have, yeah. / I guess, anti-Armour 8 Dacre Stewart binge as well, yeah.
Yeah, and they've got, because the D2 pins and the little 1-inch template means you're getting 2 hits on a hit. It is, they are nice just generally. But yes, in the amount of Stewarts we're seeing, they have a big place at the minute, don't they?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
The only other thing that I wanted to discuss was half tracks generally, because when I first got into Germany, so basically I bought the Germans so I could have all the fun tanks, and one of the things I envisaged before I'd really gotten into it as a competitive game was running my Germans all in half tracks and just storming across the board, and then the points values very much knocked the wind out of my sails.
Yeah, it's a rhetorical question, but yeah, why can't half tracks be cheaper? If they could, they'd be great because they're so iconic. I do, to be fair, when I play Germans, and I don't play them competitively at all. I do stick my Stern Pioneers in one of the little baby half tracks, 250/1s, 5-man half track, and then just run it around the board, jump out, flame something, shoot some stuff with the MMG on the half track. But it is really expensive, sadly. So
yeah, that was my plan with the Budapest Recce platoon, was to have all the 250s because they can actually have Recce as well. But as you can imagine, that gets even more pricey. I think it's 85 points for a 250/1 with Recce.
With Recce, yeah.
And you can only carry 5 men.
Yeah.
Which means if you're taking 4 squads, you spend 400 points on them. And so, yeah, looking at it, the 251/1, the 12-man transport. Now a truck is 54 points with an MMG. The 251/1, 89 points. So you're paying 35 points for armor 7. But your rifles can still pin the transport and the men inside.
Yeah.
And that is one of the house rules that I've seen played that actually I think does make them more viable, where you say, okay, small arms don't pin the passengers. And now you're paying a surplus, but you've gained a benefit for those 35 points because it means the flamethrower squad that you've put inside the half track are getting out with no pins, whereas if they'd been in a truck, they might have had 2 or 3 pins and would have missed their shot.
Yeah.
So that is one thing for Warlord to consider going forward. Or they could just make them cheaper, make it a 15, 20 point upgrade maybe.
Yeah.
I don't. How much would you pay for a half-track Phil? If I try to sell you one.
So what, a brand carrier is 60 points for 5 men with a single LMG. So 70 points for 5 men with the 2 LMGs. So yeah, I'd say what, 65 points for a 5-man half track with a MMG.
The French have a 5-man transport, which is 40 points with a machine gun on the back.
Right.
And so that, if we compare that to the Bren, that's a 20-point difference. And we see that people are running the Brens all day long. Yeah. So I think that 20 points difference is the sweet spot to get people to run German half tracks. Brilliant. Well, that's all from me. Was there anything else you want to talk about?
No more German units from me, no.
Brilliant. So I think all I've got left to say is thank you all for listening.
Please do continue to like, share, subscribe, and all the things that you are already doing.
And it's ta-ta for now.
And it's ta-ta for now from me.